Hello. We're here. Phew. The first conference back, really, for who's not been to a conference in the past 2 years? Okay, so first conference back for basically all of us. I'm sure you're all a bit knackered. I hope you've all learnt a lot. I know there's going to be thank yous and closing and everything else later, but I think a massive thank you to the organizing team, to all the speakers. It's not easy after 2 years coming back and going through all the motions, but I think just a round of applause to say thank you to everyone for making this happen. So, leadership in tech. Very quickly, who am I? The boring bit. My name is Michael. I have been in the PHP ecosystem for most of my life, well over a decade at this point. I am the head of engineering at a company called Bud. We're actually primarily in Go, but if you want to hear more about what Bud does, come talk to me afterwards. I'm also on the Symphony core team, on the sort of security side, not the security component, the sort of application security of Symphony itself. And a lot of you might know me from the Fig stuff. I used to do a lot of Fig stuff back in the day, less so now. But yeah, that's me. My Twitter handle is going to be in the corner of all the slides if you want to tweet or whatever, but hopefully more importantly, I'll be posting my slides at the end of the talk if you want to refer back to anything. So, leadership in tech. Before I kind of get into leadership in tech, who in this room is in something that they would view as a leadership role? Okay, most of you, great. How many of you work in a team of more than one person? Okay, there's a different number of hands, and hopefully what I'll maybe convince you about today is that even if you don't have a leadership-y job title, that doesn't mean that you're not a leader in tech. It doesn't mean you're not leading on things. Leading is there's a wealth of what that means, right? And as we said earlier, it's really important to kind of really delve into what that is and how we can be better leaders. At different levels, at different points in our career, it doesn't matter whether or not you're a CTO, a Fortune 500 company, or you're working in a team of 3 devs and you're leading on a project, or you're mentoring an intern. All of these are leading. So before we kind of get into leadership in tech, I think we need to look at what's leadership. It's a big word that I think we all use quite a lot. But what does it really mean? Now, when I was sort of prepping for this talk, I went and Googled around a bit. I was like, I did the initial thing of define leadership into Google search. And it said someone who leads, I think, or something really unhelpful like that. I was like, okay, I did define lead, maybe. I'm still not really getting anywhere. And I end up sort of on Wikipedia, as we all do, right? And it turns out that basically nobody really agrees what leadership is. There are lots of different academic papers that sort of talk about what leadership could be, and lots of people disagree about it. I think there's a general consensus, perhaps, though, in where it involves one party promoting movement or change in another party. So me going and like pushing someone onto like the other side of the stage? Is that me leading them? Not necessarily. But then if you're a shepherd and you're, sort of herding some sheep, are you leading those sheep? But I think one thing that was really clear to me is that instruction is not leadership. Telling someone to do something is not leadership. Because ultimately you're promoting that change, you're promoting that movement in others. You're not forcing it on them. So maybe it's sometimes easier to say, what is leadership? Not. What's the point of leadership? Again, you said earlier, like leadership is important, but why? What does it actually give us? And again, I spent a bit of time thinking about this and supporting others, helping invest in them, helping people learn, providing them with options, helping with alignment and direction. But all of these things, leadership isn't for the leaders. It's for the people who are following the leaders, right? And this is where it maybe differentiates a little bit from management, in that management is traditionally seen as like for the managers, right? Or for the people, for the company or whatever. But leadership is the other way around. Leadership is all about you. Leadership is all about supporting you. It's about investing in you. It's about giving you the tools that you need in order to be able to make a decision or to be able to execute on a project or such, something like that. So, who's a leader? I said at the beginning of this, I believe almost everyone is a leader in different ways, but I don't think there's also a simple answer to this, but I kind of want to just jump into tech leadership here, and what are the different kinds of tech leadership that we have? Like, what are the different forms of tech leadership that we have? I think it all starts with mentoring. Now, who's been mentored at some point in their career? And who feels that they've had a formal mentor? Not sort of, obviously informal mentoring happens quite frequently, but who's had maybe a formal mentor? A lot few of you. I think that's really telling, and I think that's a failing of ours of an industry, to be honest. I think that it's really important to have both informal and formal mentoring. If you're an informal mentor, that might be you working in a team. You might have someone who's a bit more junior than yourself. You might have someone who's more senior than yourself, someone who you look up to, who you think is smarter than you or whatever. That doesn't mean you can't mentor them. That doesn't mean that you don't have things that you can help them with, things that you can coach them on. It might not be technical. It might be something going on in their personal life. It might be social skills. It could be any one of these things. But then we also have formal mentoring. And I think that particularly in a lot of, when you work in a smaller company, it's very easy to have management. But one of the things that's missing there is sometimes the manager is either they're very technical, and therefore they're not necessarily very good at the sort of more, and this is not true of everyone, but sometimes they might lack a bit more in sort of the actual management-y skills or the leadership-y side of things. But you also have people that are sort of on your team, and you want to go and see, and you want to be able to give them, get them to give you sort of help on a peer level, support you. Mentoring, and sometimes that's as simple as having an occasional check-in. At Bud, for example, the way we kind of structure our teams is every one of our teams has an engineering manager, a tech lead, and a product manager in those teams. And the tech lead's role, the tech lead they don't have any reports, like they're not a line manager. But what I see is that most tech leads end up doing one-to-ones with the people on their team, and that's because they're mentoring. It's because they're catching up on the sort of that side of things. Whereas engineering managers, yes, they're technical, but they're not necessarily fully understand. They're not necessarily in the problem space. They're not necessarily in the domain or the technicalities that you're going into. So mentorship is important. The next kind of role that I guess that we kind of maybe see in which you're doing leadership, and this is the only one of these that generally involves the word lead that I've really seen. A tech lead. Every company seems to do this role a little bit differently. Sometimes it means someone who the entire team is reporting into, and they're sort of just like the technical person in charge of that area or whatever. I think there is a common baseline though. Like when you're moving into a tech lead role, there's more sort of learning about balancing. There's more role about sort of like project management and planning and translating business needs into sort of technical concerns. But what's interesting to me is like if you take those things, like those aren't really like leading things. Those are just tasks, right? Like those are icy tasks. Like managing a project, that's a task in itself. But if you want to be able to lead the team, if you want to be able to inspire others, if you want to be able to support others in being able to get somewhere, that's a really important part of that role too. And in a tech lead role, and this is normally most people's first time that they're in a formal role that involves leadership, we don't really talk enough about the leading part. But that's your role. It's the only one of these that has lead in the job title. Principal or staff engineer, particularly at larger companies where you have a long sort of a big career progression framework. You start your career as a junior, or as I like to call them, a software engineer. Like you might move through and just you develop your skills, you become a bit more senior, and then sometimes you get this title, a staff engineer, a principal software engineer, and such. You now have a title that says you probably know things, right? You're good at tech, but what this title actually says to me is that you're a person that other people can go to. You're a person that other people can learn from. And a lot of this is about leading from within, essentially. You're not a manager. You're not giving instructions. And that's a bad way of doing management as well, but I'll steer away from that. But you're essentially just another engineer, but you're an engineer with this title, and the purpose of this title is to tell other people that they can come to you. You're working on maybe some of the more difficult problems in the business and some of the more difficult challenges, and you as therefore you're not just leading on those projects, you're executing on those projects. But other people in the business need to be able to understand that you're someone that they can come and get mentorship from, that they can come and get advice from. They want to be able to look to you and see what you're doing and be like, can I do that? Like, how can I do that? You want to be an inspiration for people in the team, a source of aspiration. And I'm not saying that all of these people are the top or anything like that, but you've been given this title, and what this title actually says is you're someone that other people might want to look at and sort of learn from. So taking a small detour away from sort of roles and whatnot within a business, there's then being a leader in public. And this can mean a huge variety of different things, right? If we, and to be clear, I'm not talking about leaders in sort of public service and in government, and I'm talking about people who go on Twitter and they share their thoughts on things, or they publish blog posts, or they speak at conferences, or they are publishing videos on TikTok. These people are leaders in that. If we go back to what we were talking about as to what is leadership earlier, they're people who are trying to support other people. They're trying to give them materials. They're trying to give them advice that they can help to support the people that they're leading. And particularly if you look at Twitter, right, there are often leaders who have differing opinions on things. You might see, there was a Twitter debate a few days ago, and to be honest, I don't really go on Twitter very often as much as I used to, but in this particular instance, people were debating about pair programming. And some people were very much on the side of, pair programming is the key to everything. And other leaders were saying that, no, you should never do pair programming, it's a waste of resources, you're just getting two developers to do the job of one. And there were a couple of pragmatic voices in the middle that were saying, well, maybe it's good in certain situations and not in others. But being a leader in public is you sharing your experiences, you sharing your knowledge, and other people might choose to listen to that. They also are entitled to go and listen to other views and other things on that. And that's one of the really important things about being a leader and understanding leadership is you're not always right. What is right for you? And that might be like how you're a leader. It might be what you're thinking. It might be the direction you want to go in, or it might be your views on pairing. But not every leader is right, and in public, that sometimes gets distorted a little bit. In that sometimes same inside of a business. Sometimes you have, like as a leader, you're going with a decision. You're going with something, and you kind of have to. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be humble about and open to the idea that there might be other opinions, there might be other situations in which what you're saying might not be the case. So management. We've made it 15 minutes into this talk and we haven't really talked about management. Is anyone in the room an engineering manager or has reports of some kind? A few of you. So management is when it all kind of changes a little bit. And I think management and leadership are very different roles, but as a manager, you inherently should be a leader. I don't believe that you can be a good manager without being a good leader. But generally speaking, the qualities of like management and leadership, they're not exactly the same. They're not one for one. You can't just swap the words in and out. Like I couldn't have renamed this talk to like management in tech, for example. Despite the fact that some of you might have noticed the talk has changed title a couple of times. You know, in management, you're starting to think about hiring. You're starting to think about, you know, maybe how many people you need on your team. There's also sort of managing performance of potentially your team, performance reviews, and one-to-ones. Now, some of these are vehicles for you to be able to be a good leader. Like one-to-ones are a really good example of that. And if you want to really succeed, like having a really good manager who can give you tools, who can help you and mentor you, and often that is done through one-to-one catch-ups, which is a really important part of that relationship. But also being able to, you know, performance reviews and having check-ins, like establishing goals, working towards them. How can you better move towards those goals? That's leadership. The one thing I would say is that, like, you know, in management, there is more of a framework for, and this is where it becomes a bit difficult in terms of when you're a manager, you then suddenly have to balance this sense of leadership is all for the person, for the individual. In management, you have these two conflicting priorities, right? Because suddenly you also have to, in some of the worst situations, you have to let someone go. That's, in some situations, not necessarily the best thing for that individual. And this is where management and leadership, they almost conflict. And earlier when I was talking about like the need for mentoring and the need for, and as a manager, you're not necessarily, again, in that technical space. You don't know, say that your company uses RabbitMQ. Your engineering manager probably, you know, they might have never used RabbitMQ. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go and get mentoring from someone else that, you know, can help sort of you enhance your knowledge on that. But it's really essential to be able to go and find someone who's not just your manager in order to be able to find that mentoring, because of that conflict of essentially a conflict of interests. On the other hand, a good manager should be giving you a lot of the tools that you need to succeed there in that area. A good manager. We'll talk a bit about what that might mean in a minute. And then we have senior leadership. There are a lot of different titles in our industry that generally refer to people who are towards the top of an organization's sort of technical function, right? Like a head of engineering, a director of engineering, an engineering director, a VP of engineering, a CTO, a chief architect. I'm probably forgetting a whole bunch of others. And we call them senior leadership, right? Their job is to lead and be senior at leading. But actually, a lot of what they end up doing is management. You know, ultimately they're making company-level decisions and that sort of side of things. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be providing leadership. Leadership on the values that matter to your company, leadership on the direction that you want to be going in, and ultimately, and this is my personal opinion more than something I would say is objectively correct, but someone who, you know, I'm a head of engineering myself. Like I see my role as being able to help engineers in engineering to be able to do their job better. I see my role as being able to give them context, to be able to give them clarity, to be able to give them energy, and which hopefully, you know, then ends up in success. Because ultimately, you know, as a senior leader, you can't be everywhere, and you have to eventually get to a point where you can trust people on the ground. So in that sense, it's about, if we go back to, again, what we were talking about, like what is leadership, where we all said it's all about like giving something to the individuals, it's all about like supporting them, it's all about giving them something, then that becomes a huge part of what senior leadership is all about. Not just, but you know, obviously these people, you know, there are other sides in terms of these people's roles. So principles. What makes a good leader? What makes a good manager? And some of these, and we've talked about a bunch of different types of leader and types of role in tech. And not all of these will apply to all of them. Like not everyone will apply to being a leader in public versus a leader inside of an organization versus a mentor and such. But so take that as you will. Number one, most important thing about leadership is listening. I like talking. I really like talking, actually. That's why I'm up here talking for 45 minutes. But you can't empathize with someone unless you listen to them, right? Listening is a precursor to empathy. Listening is how you understand what that person needs, what that person's concerns are, what that person is thinking. And in a lot of instances, hopefully that person is smarter than you in many regards, right? You have to listen before you can help support someone. You can't just go in there and just start throwing stuff over the wall and verbally vomiting all over them, which is something some leaders do. Listen. And don't hear them. Don't sit in a meeting. Lots of people talk, and then at the end of the meeting, you as the leader, you make a decision, and if you've completely ignored everything else everyone in the room has said, then it's completely pointless. Like, don't hear people, listen to them, and particularly working in software engineering or product, or wherever you're wherever you lie in terms of your role and what you do. It's actually really hard to communicate complex ideas. It's really hard. A lot of the speakers you'll have seen over the past couple of days will have been trying to communicate some complex ideas, and it's not, they'll have put tens and tens of hours into those talks that will have lasted 45 minutes. It's really complex to communicate complex ideas through the English language, through any language really. But so. Listening doesn't just involve like hearing the words, it also involves like trying to get to the bottom of those words. And sometimes that means like asking someone to explain something again in a different way. Sometimes it means asking someone else to explain that same thing if you know that they're of the same mindset, because they might explain it in a different way. Like, listening doesn't just mean hearing words, it means really trying to understand where the person is coming from and what they're trying to communicate with you. And as a leader, it's a hard skill, right? Just like communicating, but it's a really important one. It's the most important one. If you are a leader, or if you want to be a leader, or if you're looking for the number one quality in a good leader, it's listening. The second one I'd say is generating clarity. I just said it's really complicated to communicate complex ideas, right? And as a leader, that's something you're expected to be good at. Whether or not that's you talking on Twitter, or whether or not that's having a conversation one-on-one with a colleague. Be prepared to explain something, go through something twice. Be prepared to go through it again the following week, and give people maybe a bit of headspace to think about it after you've kind of talked through it. Something I do with like career progression frameworks and stuff like that is we'll go through it, we'll do like an initial go through, and then a week later we'll go back and go through it again. Because having a chance to think about it really helps. So it's really important to generate that and that clarity and be able to give that context and be able to communicate clearly, which ironically I just stammered in that sentence. The next thing I want to say is about power dynamics. And if you've not read this book, you should 100% read this book, whether you're a leader or not. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's a really interesting book. It basically talks about power. And power is almost like a weird, dirty word, I feel like, in a lot of scenarios. Unless you're talking about this kind of power, that's nuclear fission over there. But power is a bit of a dirty word because it's often used in a negative context. And it's really important to understand the power dynamics that exist. If someone starts at your company, and maybe you're a junior or a student, and this is also your first job. And you've been there 3 months, and then someone else comes in, and it's their second day. There's a power dynamic there. You might not realize it, you might not be aware of it, but ultimately that person is looking at you, and if you say something, there's all of these sort of power dynamics. This person's been there longer than me. They know what they're talking about. Like, this person is respected. This person is liked. People listen to this person. Therefore, I can't really disagree with them necessarily. this is a lot more obvious between when you might talk about someone who's more junior and earlier in their career versus someone who's a bit later or has a more senior title. But it exists in every single conversation that we have. And with society, there are so many biases that we have and so many stereotypes, and all of this feeds into power dynamics. And as a leader, you have to be careful of that as well. It's very easy if people respect and they listen to you and they're like, this person normally says good stuff, right? And then you go into a discussion and you say something. Sometimes there's an element of people not wanting to disagree with you. There's sometimes an element of people could be fearing for and concerned about their career, and that might mean something you're not familiar with because you're more comfortable in your role or whatever. But it's really important to try and think about those different dynamics that could be existing in almost every single conversation. But when you're more likely to be the one that is more powerful, or seen or could be interpreted to be more powerful, it's your responsibility to be addressing that. It's your responsibility to be able to take a step back from perhaps introducing your opinion, letting other people, this is another point, but letting other people speak first, so that they don't feel afraid to speak up in some instances. And separately, you want to obviously encourage a culture where people can speak up. But even if you feel like you have that culture, that doesn't mean there aren't power dynamics still at play. Generating energy and inspiring others. Woo! There's also this geeky thing. I was trying to come up with an image for energy and nuclear fission. Thank you, Wikipedia. As a leader, you want to be inspiring others. You want to be generating energy. You want to be making people excited to work on something. You want to be getting them excited about the new release, version 5.1.2 of Symfony. That's exciting because it's got all of these new features in. Energy is really important, and you want to be delivering that in the way that you intend. But you also want to inspire others, and sometimes that's through talking about something, but sometimes that's also through just like being a nice human, and doing certain things. As a principal engineer or a staff engineer, like one of the things that you're in that role for is partially to attract other people to your company, because hopefully they say, oh, I know that person, I respect that person, I think that person's good. And you want to inspire other people to maybe be like, I want to be that. I want to be that good. So inspiring others, and that doesn't necessarily just mean technically, like getting to a certain level. It might be, I want to be as good at that person at leading meetings. Or I want to be as good at that person at, I don't know, having beers down the pub, or whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter what you're inspiring them to do, but as a leader, that's what that's all about. I kind of already unintentionally talked on this one a little bit, but speaking last. When there's a discussion going on, and you are seen as potentially a leader in that group, if you speak early in that discussion, then it's very easy for other people to be like, okay, well, that's that, the decision's made, or whatever. What you really want to do is you want to, and let's go back to point number one, you want to listen. You want to see what other people are thinking. And speak last, if you have to speak at all. Because, like, ideally, what you should be, and this is my personal approach, which is you want to be working with the individuals in that scenario so that they have the tools to be able to go and come up with those ideas themselves. You shouldn't even need to speak necessarily in that discussion. But if you do need to speak, like, let everyone else have their turn first. And particularly in a world of where we're all on video conferences and everything else, like, taking turns when speaking is a really important thing, and about how people interrupt and everything else, and that's all changed, and it's all a bit weird, and I think, to be honest, we're probably all still getting a bit used to it. But don't interrupt. Let other people speak. Listen, and if you need to speak, speak last. You're all one team. This is one of my favorite photos, actually, by the way. This was a conference where we all got like these sort of like fake, not fake as in like temporary, like I love PHP tattoos on our arms, but it's a genuine, real photo from a conference. And so many people use this in their marketing material since I took this. You're all one team. Just because you're the manager or you're the tech lead or whatever, you have different roles, you're all one team. You hopefully all want to accomplish the same goal, and you should never forget that. You should never be like, oh, this is my team. You should never be in a position where, like, something that you sometimes see is like an us and them. between like leaders of a team or people in management roles and people who are in a team. You don't want an us and them attitude. And if you're in a leadership position, it is your responsibility to deal with that. It's not like you can't be like, oh, but like, I don't know why there's an us and them or whatever. Like, if there's an us and them, that's on you as leaders to sort out. You're all one team, and you want people to feel like they're moving in the same direction. Keeping or being technical. When you change roles in tech, you go into engineering management, you go into a head of engineering role or whatever. This is something that comes up a lot. Like, how do you stay technical? Like, how do you keep in touch? And I think personally, I think this is super important. If you like being able to retain a sense of technicality. CTOs, it doesn't really matter as much because ultimately, as a CTO, your responsibility is business first, technology second. Like, if you're a CTO who codes, that's fine, but like particularly when you get bigger, it's less of a big deal. You can bring in other people to work on that. But it's really hard, and you'll have to find your own way of being able to do this, and you'll have to find your own balance as well. It's different for everyone. Like, I still work on open source stuff, and you know, I'm still on the Symphony core team, for example, but it's you don't want to lose, you don't want to get too out of touch, but you will. You will inherently lose, you will not be as good as you would be if you were day in, day out, being an individual contributor. So again, it's an important point to kind of touch on. Manage stresses. So I caught, this was in a keynote from a few conferences ago, and I'm going to replace one of the words with something a bit more appropriate and less sweary. But they said that there were 3 different types of manager. You could have poop umbrellas, you could have poop funnels, and you could have poop fans. A poop umbrella, where they protect you from all the poop that comes down, they protect their team from it coming down on them. You had poop funnels, who would funnel all of the poop into a specific person on the team or a specific part of the team. And you would have poop fans, where the poop would come in and it would randomly disperse out and hit random other individuals. And the thing that I think this demonstrates is your responsibility as a leader is to essentially manage the stresses of that team. There is an element of, and people often like to use the word protect the team. It's almost protection, but I think there's also an element of you have to be careful not to, you don't want to like not tell the team stuff, right? Like, you don't be hiding stuff from the team. You don't want to be overprotective. But there is an element of you want to manage that team's stresses. If you're getting pressure from above or pressure from another department, that doesn't mean you should just, you don't want to be passing all that pressure through. Don't do that. Manage those stresses. So, finding good leaders. When we interview for new jobs, there's always that bit at the end, and they say, have you got any questions? And someone says, okay, well, what's your tech stack? Or, you know, what languages are you using? Or do you do TDD? Or, you know, what kind of processes do you use? Do you use Kanban? Do you use that kind of thing? But nobody really asks, like, what are your, like, principles as a leader? Like, what is your vision for how you want engineering to go? It's probably the most important thing that differs between companies, right? Like, is the individuals that you're going to be with day in, day out, the people you're going to be able to learn from, the people that are going to be leading, the people that are going to be making potentially decisions. You want to, and you need a vision that you can buy into. You need to find the right kind of leader. So, and how can they help you? Not how can you just spit out code for them that makes them more money. And sometimes, and there's also an element of, if the company is small enough, you want to be meeting those people as well. Like, you want to get a sense of, like, who are you? And sometimes that's not possible. But if it is, you want to be trying to do that and sort of identify that fit. You're potentially making a decision that, you know, you're going to be working with these people for the next anywhere from 6 months to 5 years, maybe. You know, it depends. So what do you want? People you can learn from. Doesn't mean technically necessarily, but ideally that's a good thing. Like, people that you can learn from technically in different areas. People that, you know, you view as intelligent or such. You can respect, but it can be other things too. People that you can learn from in terms of, like, processes, in terms of time management, in terms of, like, handling situations with colleagues. It's people you can learn from, people you can respect. If you can't respect or learn from the people that you're working with, you're not going to be growing in the way you necessarily might want to be. Someone who will give you feedback. You want honest feedback. It's the only way you're going to get better. And I don't mean that from you want your manager giving you feedback. You want your peers to be giving you feedback too. Peer feedback is sometimes more useful because sometimes you'll be interacting with them more than you will your manager. But they'll be less good at giving feedback, generally speaking. So again, keep that in mind and have a think about how can I get the best feedback from those around me. You want to work with leaders who have a vision and a view that you buy into. There are many different dynamics in the workplace. Like sometimes you might, like some people might have a great relationship with their manager because they just spend all of their time like insulting them, right? Like there might be other people who, we all have different personality types. We're all different people, and that's what makes us great as a human race. But that also means that not everyone fits together, right? You want to find someone with a view and a vision that you buy into, not just someone who has like a generic good vision or whatever. Find someone you gel with. Someone who will respect you back. You don't want someone who just sees you as a resource or is just going to be like, oh, well, you're just a junior or whatever. You want someone who's going to respect you for who you are and what you can do. You want someone who believes that you can do more because they will help you to go further. But if they don't respect you, then you're not going to be enjoying yourself. And finally, you want someone who wants to help you grow and not just help grow themselves. As a manager in a lot of places, sometimes you find people that they want to hire more people so they become more powerful or they have a bigger sort of scope of responsibility. You want someone who they will do everything they possibly can to help grow you, sometimes at the expense of their own career. And the best managers are the ones who you'll meet 5-10 years later, and you might now be a higher level or whatever you view success as. And you meet them, and then they're like, "I'm really proud of like how you got there," and you're like, "I'm thankful for how you helped me get there." That's what you want. You want a manager who potentially wants you to outgrow them, wants you to fulfill your full potential, not is just focusing on their own career. So, of course, of time. So finally, becoming a leader. Like, what does that mean? How can you become a leader? Number one, first step. Mentor people. We've already established earlier that almost everyone in this room, or the vast majority, felt that they do mentoring of some kind. Find someone in your team, coach them on a topic. Perhaps become a formal mentor to someone. It really helps and it's really valuable. We're an industry that struggles a bit when it comes to like juniors and getting them into industry. So mentor people. Find the right mentor. So I mentioned earlier about sometimes this is your manager, but your manager sometimes has conflicts. Sometimes having a mentor and a manager is a good thing. But you want to have someone who, you want to find like the right sort of good leaders that will help you grow and help you become a better leader. Leadership is really hard, like really hard. There are like 100,000 books on leadership. There aren't normally 100,000 books on things that are like people can just do in their sleep. Leadership is hard, and finding someone that you can have honest conversations with, that you can be vulnerable with, but it's also they know you well enough or are able to know you well enough to be able to give you that and give you honest feedback is really important. It's also really helpful to sometimes work with a bad manager. And the reason I say that is if you want to be a good manager, it's sometimes really useful to have seen a bad manager in the past. If you've only ever worked with good managers and then you become a manager, it's very easy to be like, oh, this will make sense. Seeing a bad manager and seeing how they manage will sometimes help you learn of things that you don't want to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're objectively bad, but things that you wouldn't do if you wanted to be in that role. Don't stay with a bad manager for too long. I'm saying, but there are things that you should learn from that experience and take from that. Books. there are so many books on this topic. Probably the '1 book that I'd recommend is called The Manager's Path by Camille Fournier. I hope I've said her surname correctly. It's from O'Reilly. It is easily the best book on this topic as sort of an introductory book. Beyond that, there are 100,000 books on leadership and tech leadership. But if you want some recommendations, drop me a DM on Twitter. Find some communities. You might not be able to find necessarily a formal mentor straight away, but I really like this. It's a Slack group with topics on sort of every element of tech leadership you can imagine. So it's called RANs. And mailing lists, meetups, there are all of this kind of stuff for leadership and for tech leaders that I'd highly recommend. Blog. There's someone at this conference who's a speaker who you would all know the name of. And she started a blog, and she initially, when she was using it, she was just essentially putting, when she was, she'd spend time like trying to work something out, and then when she worked it out, she'd put it on her blog to help other people when they came across that scenario in future. And this person is now seen as a big leader in tech and someone we all listen to and when they talk. Start a blog, and it doesn't have to be you going and delivering the latest hot take on something. It can just be how you solved a problem. It can be that simple. Leadership is not leadership. Like when you're just sort of sharing knowledge, it can be really easy to get started with. So please do it. Go and give it a go. And then finally, conferences. Go and give a talk. Every single one of, if you go and speak to any one of the speakers from the past couple of days, almost every single one of them will tell you that they don't consider themselves to be an expert or the smartest person, in the room or whatever. They probably don't even consider themselves the smartest person on the specific topic that they were talking on. There might be some exceptions to that, when they've invented it or whatever. But they're just people who have experienced something and that they've worked with something. They've worked with a piece of technology. They've had some experience in something, and they want to share that. I am not an expert on tech leadership. But here I am talking to you about tech leadership at the closing keynote of the first conference back after 2 years. I'm not an expert in it, but that doesn't mean that I don't have things that I can share. And hopefully that has been helpful for all of you. So next time that there's a PHP London meetup when it's back, PHP Southwest down in Bristol, like at your local user group, a conference, you've got PHP UK, you've got GopherCon, there are so many others. Don't be afraid to submit. Don't be afraid to think about how you can be a leader. Don't be afraid to think about how you can share your knowledge. Find the right people that will help you grow, that can mentor you in your leadership growth and your sort of future. And even if you don't want to be a leader, find the right leaders. Find the right people who will be able to help you get the most out of you, that you can live and work the best life that you want to be. Because who doesn't want to be living the best life that they could be? Thank you very much. I don't think we've got time for questions. I don't know. Sam? No? All right. Thank you very much.